All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of Chapter 7. One last short video to show you. Kind of covers the IPAT equation and some other interesting tidbits of information about, fully substantiating my famous saying, there's too many freaking people. Anyway, we'll get started on this. It's going to be a great weekend. Looking forward to a lot of great football action. And I want to get this video done so that I can enjoy it. So here we go. Okay, we begin this little discussion by talking about something called the IPAT equation. And IPAT stands for these four letters. Impact, environmental impact is what we're talking about here, equals population times affluence times technology. You notice that there's no denominator here in this equation. So any one of these factors can increase the impact. Even though the A might be low and the T might be low, the high P still equals a high impact. Let me give you an example. China, although we can measure ecological footprints by land area as an impact, you can also take any individual environmental issue as an impact as well. So let's take carbon emissions, for example. We're always considered the boogeyman when it comes to carbon emissions. We're the bad guys because of all the cars that we drive, and we have electricity everywhere. Well, China has passed us as a country when it comes to carbon emissions. So now they're the ones that need to be standing tall in front of the world community when we talk about climate change and carbon emissions. Their impact is high, not because A is high. In fact, A is kind of low for China. So is T. T is kind of low for China. But because they have so many people, their carbon impact has been very high. Now, we saw in the previous slide from last time, let me show it to you quickly here, that their per capita footprint is relatively low, especially compared to us. Well, that's because their population ends up being in the denominator. So they're putting 1.3 billion people in their denominator. We're only putting 0.3 billion people in our denominator. So for us, our impact is high, not so much because our P is very high, but we have a very high A and we have a very high T. So anyway, you kind of get the idea of how this equation fluctuates and how it works. And the book goes into quite a bit of detail concerning what these what happens when population, that's an easy one to measure. Affluence isn't so easy to measure, but a family of four, just think of the things that a family of four uses consumption wise. You're probably a family of four, 3 or 4 or 5. So your affluence is really quite high. You have a large home, you have a nice lawn, you have multiple cars. Now imagine that same family of 4 but lives in an impoverished country. Their A is very low. They probably don't have any car in their family. They might not even have electricity or running water. No lawn to water, no fertilizers to use. You get the idea. And the same thing with technology. Technology uses a lot of resources. Now the problem with technology is it's kind of a double-edged sword, because we can use technology to decrease our I if the technology is being used in the right ways. For instance, we've developed the technology of hybrid cars. We've developed the technology of solar panels and wind farms and things like that. So that is a higher T, but that T isn't necessarily raising our I because it's for the good of the environment. Having said that, most of our technological advances harm the environment. We don't have to look any further than fracking. We're just now getting into this new technology of being able to access natural gas reserves that we used to not be able to do. But at what cost? That technology is definitely a higher T, and that's causing a higher I. So technology's give and take. You have to think about that one for a minute and ask yourself, what technology are we talking about if you're going to assess the impact of a technology on the overall IPAT equation. All right, in the book they talk about local impacts versus global impacts, and this should not come as a big surprise to you, but the developing countries, most of their impacts are local. You know, what's happening in their village is about the only resource that they're impacting, whether it's food or water. This picture here is a picture of what's happening at an alarming rate in Brazil, and that is deforestation of the tropical rainforest and the soil damage, soil erosion damage that occurs as a result of deforestation. But that's a local impact because they are clearing this land so that they can grow crops to feed all of their people. Global impacts are more a creature of the developed countries, because when you buy something, you're probably getting some part of that item from overseas. So in that case, you know, we have many more global impacts than, say, a developed country or developing country. And then they talked about urban impacts in the book quite a bit, because we have statistics that show us how many people are living in cities. Now, an urban area is defined as about 1,000 people per square mile. So you got to ask yourself, are we an urban environment? Probably not. But is Jacksonville? The answer to that question would be yes. So it's 1,000 people per square mile. New York City's the most densely populated city in the U.S. They have 10,000 people per square mile in a 1 square mile area. 10,000 people living there. That's just amazing. But Mumbai, India is the most in the world, and they're about 2.5 times what New York is. 23,000 people per square mile. Now, what are the urban impacts? When we have all of these people living near each other, and the urban movement, which we'll cover in another chapter, the urban movement is divided by developed and developing countries. The MEDCs, by and large, are showing a slight movement out of their cities. In other words, our movement into cities has already occurred, and now we're starting to go suburban. And Europe likewise. But in the developing countries, in the LEDCs, they are moving to cities in droves. Why? Because cities offer for them a way out of their hut. They can move to a city, maybe get a job. That's the hub of education. It's the hub of healthcare. It's the hub of culture. And so people in the developing countries are moving to cities in droves. As a result of that, we see the development of a city on the outskirts of the city. And these people are so poor, they don't have money to take their family to the city and go rent an apartment or rent a house. So they have to build something that's called squatter settlements. And I don't know if we need to get into GDP. We talked about it in chapter 1. Gross domestic product is just a way we measure the affluence or the wealth of a given country. And of course, the developing countries are going to have a very low GDP. We lead the world in GDP, I believe. I don't think China has passed us when it comes to GDP. But, it helps us to sort of rank the countries in the world. High GDPs usually mean increased industrialization, and increased industrialization usually means increased pollution that has to be dealt with in some way or another. So here was the graph that was in the book, just to show you that in the world, this is sort of our current situation. About half of the people in the world live in cities, but we expect that to rise drastically, at least 10%. It's not going to rise so much with the developed countries. This increase is not due to people moving into cities. It's just due to an increased number of people that live in cities having kids. Notice this is 2030, so this is about one generation from our current time here. But the developing countries are seeing a much greater movement into urban areas. And here's the largest urban centers in the world, and you can see most of them are in developing countries. Tokyo is by far the biggest. That is an MEDC. New York is second. That's an MEDC. But then we start seeing Mexico. Mexico City is an LEDC. Mumbai is an LEDC. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Brazil is a LEDC. India is an LEDC. China is an LEDC. India is a LEDC. Bangladesh, you get the idea. And then we get back to the U.S. Here's LA. Long Beach, Santa Ana, that's an M. And you get the idea. Pakistan. Egypt is a M, MEDC. Brazil is not. That's an L. Here's another M, and on and on. So, you see that the 20 largest urban areas, probably 75% of them are in LEDCs. And here's the human impact of that. It's really just the fact that so many people are living in shanty towns, squatter settlements, like the one we saw in the book. All right, one last topic in this chapter is about sustainable development, a common but elusive goal. And this is where we should be thinking for the future. It's not just food we're talking about. It's not an easy problem to solve, but it's the resources that we're using. Are we replacing them? We've got to find a way to replace them so that we can sustain them. And it's not just sustainable practices that we can do in terms of protecting future generations, or if it's just about food. But it's also, the sustainability is also an issue when it comes to the pollution that we create. All of these people on the planet, and you saw the numbers, the growth rate continues to expand. These people consume ever greater numbers of resources and create ever higher amounts of pollution. So it's an input problem, running out of the things that are non-renewable, and it's an output problem, finding ways to deal with the pollution we create. Even garbage is an issue that we need to deal with when it comes to all of the people on Earth. All right, so that's it for Chapter 7. I'm hoping that you're working on outline of Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is all about Earth resource stuff. Boy, it's kind of dry. I have to admit, I may give you last year's videos because they're pretty good and I don't feel like sitting in front of a camera and talking about them again. But having said that, I don't want to dissuade you from doing your part and doing the outlines, watching the videos, and following along with this information, because it's a lot of information on the AP exam. And oh my goodness, the ACE exam. ACE hits these Earth resource issues much harder than AP does. They talk about volcanic activity, earthquakes. There's a lot of depth involved on the ACE exam. Soil. The end of Chapter 8 has soil in it. And so we got to get involved with all of that stuff. So ACE people especially pay particular attention to Chapter 8. One last thing about Chapter 7, now that we're at the end, I think it might be a good idea for you to look over the multiple choice questions at the end of Chapter 7. Look up the answers so that you can easily get 100 on that quiz. which will be coming up next week. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you later.